Okay. This is Chuck Wolf, and you're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM listener-supported radio in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I have the pleasure of having a guest on today that's going to answer, I think, a number of people's questions about how it feels to be missing sports. One of the people that I had the pleasure of getting to know in the last few years is a fellow named Rick Haberman. And Rick's background, he might say a bit more about himself, but he's been the director of peak performance for the Minnesota Twins. He's worked with all the sports teams, I guess, at the University of Minnesota. And he's actually written a book, too, about why good coaches quit and how to handle all the other stuff. So I think that's all the other stuff is really pretty much dominating these days. So I think that's a pretty good intro to get started. But one of the ways I know Rick is because we're both members of this group called the Consortiums for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. It's a group that brings together a lot of people around the world who are looking at and studying and using and applying this concept of emotional intelligence in all different manners of life. And there's a lot of people that do a lot of research, and there's a lot of people that are doing some really innovative things with practice. And Rick's one of them in the sports world. And so I've got a few questions I'm going to be asking Rick in a moment. But one of the questions that introduced me to Rick early on was I had the chance to work with the Division I basketball team at the University of Hartford for a number of years. And as I was trying to understand what I've been doing in the corporate world and with nonprofits and military organizations, all kinds of other organizations, I'd never really dealt with the sports world before. And Rick was a great asset to me when I was first doing some of that work. So I've gotten to know Rick over the years, really enjoy him. And this is a chance I thought to have him on the radio show. And so this is a conversation with Rick about sports and what's happening with how we're feeling about missing sports and what are the athletes experiencing, what are coaches experiencing, what are some of the plans for getting back and getting sports back up and running again without fans in the crowd. How's that going to feel? And also I just thought I'd ask Rick about his own personal experiences. So that's my intro. And for those of you who listen regularly to the show, you know that a lot of the times when I'm in studio and not doing it via Zoom, I'm having people call in with challenges that they face. And I'm trying to use the emotion roadmap to answer those challenges. But in the last few weeks and months, there's been a lot of pressure not to go to the studio. And so I'm doing these from my home office. And so with that, I want to introduce Rick Haberman. And Rick, would you like to say anything that I might have missed on your bio that you think is important for people to know about you?
Well, I appreciate that, Chuck. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. It's a pleasure, and it's always enjoyable for it's good times when you and I get together and chat, so thank you. I work in a lot of different venues, certainly the sports world. It's been my whole career, and the corporate world. And I'm familiar with both of those things in business and in sports. And you know, we're still dealing with people. I'd like to say that it's the relatively same issues, just different venues. In my world, I deal with high performers. Most of the people I see are pretty good at what they do. In fact, often they're the best at what they do in their field, in their sport, in their industry. And but these are people as well, and so we want to be able to provide them with a resource that they might not ordinarily seek until there's a crisis. And so this is really about being more proactive.
Imagine that if you're an athlete and you're used to performing on a certain season and you're used to being in front of a crowd and operating with pressure and also dealing with the successes and the failures of being in front of sometimes literally hundreds of thousands of people that might be watching on television. It's challenging to be isolating now and to be away from it and to not even know whether you want to get back to it because of the risk that's involved. At the same time, you miss it deeply. So before we talk about fans' experiences, I don't know, I know you can't talk about anything personal about any individuals, but in general, can you share some of the kind of themes that might be running across professional athletes now who are not able to participate in their sports?
Yeah, I think you hit it. All of those things are true. These are people who are typically used to being in the limelight, and often being in that limelight is very helpful for them. You know, there is a certain amount of isolation, a great amount of isolation that we're all experiencing right now. Mm-hmm. And these are people that, you know, tend to be more connected to groups or teams. You know, we're not talking about the individual athletes. I think their issues are a little bit different. but in terms of some of the individual sports, but certainly for the team sports, it's a real shift for them. And when you think of athletes, Chuck, these people have gotten to where they are because they're highly disciplined. They are really good at establishing routines and structures and things that help orient themselves. And a lot of those typical things that they have done that allow them to go where they want to go are no longer available to them. And that can be really disorienting. Everybody's used to the off season and enjoys it and takes advantage of some downtime, and we need that. But when you're having downtime during a time when you are typically in the middle of your season, it's just like waking up in the middle of the night and having it be daylight out. It's very strange and very disorienting.
Well, I know you work in the corporate world, Rick, as well as with athletes. I know that in corporate worlds, executives fail, and one of my friends talks about failure as a learning curve. I mean, it's like you need to fail in order you want to keep failing better. You keep want to learn from failure and keep growing and doing more. But a lot of people struggle with failure. Somebody who fails in a business world, they might have a few people that know about their failure. If they're obviously a very senior person, a lot of people know. But in the athletic world, anybody that's watching knows as soon as you fail. And so it's more immediate. But you also have a quicker chance to turn it around. Do you find yourself saying different kinds of things to people in the different worlds?
Well, they're pretty similar. You're absolutely right. I mean, you make a mistake in the office and people aren't reading about it in the paper the next day, or it's not being discussed on the sports and the radio talk shows and the sports talk shows around the country. So yes, you're not in the limelight in the same way. Your impact can be as large, if not larger, in the corporate world. But nonetheless, that kind of limelight is a little bit different, and that pressure to perform is a little bit different. But other than that, you're still dealing with people who keep score. Results matter, and there's that pressure to perform, and there's that expectation that as professionals, there's not a lot of room for error. And so what happens is now you're talking about a population that does really well anyway at the professional level. So they have a lot of experience with success, not as much experience at failure. And sometimes for the very first time in their life, that whether it's sustaining a career-threatening injury or being the good high school athlete, now the best college athlete, and now a professional athlete, but now you're with a bunch of bests. Right. Maybe you don't start right away. Maybe you're on the bench. Maybe you're a rookie. Maybe you're not. You might have doubts and things that you haven't never had before. When we're good at something, there's the tendency for our sense of self to be dependent on what we do and how we do it. And the reality is that's a slippery slope. In other words, it's great when it works. When I'm going well and having success, I feel great about myself. But if I experience some failure or make mistakes, or I go in a slump, and my sense of self is dependent on the result, now all of a sudden I'm down and my mood is lousy, and people don't want to be around me or whatever it is. So that kind of up and down is something that we try and work with from a peak performance standpoint to kind of level that out so that our results don't define who we are, but who we are as a person is defined by more what's important to us, our values, our beliefs, things like that.
When you talk about peak performance, I know you've actually had a book written by somebody else, a Sports Illustrated writer as well, that talks about your model that you use with athletes. You want to talk a little bit about how you help people to maintain and achieve peak performance?
Again, we're dealing with people who are used to a lot of success, and these are people who tend to be highly motivated, but sometimes they'll get in their own way, or their motivational styles will inhibit them. And so, in other words, what has helped us get to this level may no longer be helpful to get to the next level. And so we have to make some adjustments on that. And it's identifying those things. But I'm really looking more from a psychodynamic level, kind of what's going on with our thoughts and emotions, particularly in terms of our inner world and how we're dealing with our inner world as it pertains to our well-being and our effectiveness out in the world, and in this case, sports. So most of the people I deal with, they know how to concentrate. Concentration isn't the issue. it's an issue only because they're dealing with a divorce or a parent who is sick or fears and anxieties that they're not willing to address. These are people that are really good at denying their emotions. In fact, they are professional deniers,
Interesting.
and that's helped them achieve, and it helps them compete. But it is also one of those strengths that's a weakness, and so we want to be able to kind of look under the hood and help them through some of those struggles.
That's fascinating. I mean, some of the work that I've done in recent years, Rick, has been about, I was asked to write a chapter not too long ago, 2019, the book got published. The chapter was Successful Coaches Influence Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. And, you know, if you think about anybody with a behavior that's irrational, I mean, the one that comes to mind right now is you see people dressed up, look like educated people texting while they're driving, or looking at their phones anyway while they're driving. It's an insane behavior, really. And yet we see people that you might guess would be educated and, you know, otherwise smart people doing very irrational things. And when they get asked about it or get caught at it, they swear they'll never do it again and find themselves yet still doing these you know, very dangerous behaviors. So if you look at what's happening and you want to change any behavior, whether it's overeating or drinking or anything that might be a problem for you and you haven't yet, the way I wrote the chapter was that, well, you want to look at the self-talk before the behavior starts. What are you saying to yourself right before you engage in that behavior? Because you know it's wrong. I mean, it's clear that if anybody talks to you about it, it's clear that you know it's wrong, and yet you're still doing it. And so if you look at the self-talk, you then want to ask yourself, well, what feelings are driving that self-talk? Because we know feelings influence thoughts, influence behaviors. And so you've got to either change the self-talk or you have to change the feeling. And so when you recognize that impulse, we have to jump to that and take that, look at that, or can it wait? I mean, chances are it's not the emergency you think it might be. And can you wait?
Well, and so the question is, as I see, and you make a great point, you know, we're going to experience whatever we experience. We have the feelings we have. It's the decisions we make around the expressions of those emotions that are up for discussion. That is, we can feel fearful, and this is where emotional intelligence comes into play, being able to stay focused on your goal, even though you're feeling a bunch of different things. So yes, I hear the beep, I want to look at my phone, but I also want to make sure that I get to where I need to go safely. And so that's my goal. So making that decision and being able to do it quite rapidly is critical. And to do that, I have to pay attention to my inner experience. What's going on inside of me? So to your point, what am I saying to myself? What am I feeling? Things like that. And we don't want to just be doing, because we can do that, but from a performance standpoint, we're going to underperform. Because the reality is, and you know, I work in all the different sports, some more than other, but believe me, I've worked from fencing to football.
Okay.
Literally. And it's always, sustained high performance is always about the same thing. It's about our ability to make good decisions under pressure. And we can sit and talk about how we might strategize and how we might want to do a play and how we might approach a meeting or the client or things like that. But it's the decisions we make during the play. Are we able to read and respond to what's going on, manage those emotions, and often conflicting emotions, by staying focused on our goal, which is going to help us be an ultimately a sustainable high performer.
That's really interesting, Rick. I guess it's changed somewhat now in terms of the phone calls you're getting. People aren't asking about how do I stay in the moment on the field. The question is, how do I handle whatever's happening right now while I'm sitting at home and I'm not getting a chance to perform at all?
Yeah. And, you know, I think one of the things we're dealing with is we think about this kind of along the line of a trauma. You know, something has happened from a pandemic, which has flipped our world on a dime in about a second. I mean, it's been really quick if you think about it. So we've experienced this trauma and this shock, and we sort of go through this process of kind of figuring it out, becoming disoriented, and then kind of figuring out how to get our bearings. And now we're used to, working from home. We're used to doing the Zoom interviews, and this has become kind of normalized, if you will. But then now we're also dealing with, as this continues, we're starting to get some Zoom fatigue. We're starting to think about, well, gosh, how many walks can I go on? And, all of these things. And by the way, we're going to start opening things up, and we're talking about return to play. So I think what's happened when we look at, this is where where I'm addressing things with my clients, is that we need to consider that there's an inherent loss that's taking place. And we think about a loss, it's maybe there's been an actual loss of a person who has succumbed as a fatality, and that's certainly horrible. But there's also the psychological loss of, it's kind of nice being around my family, or not having to get dressed to go to the office or to go to the park. And I'm on the road half the time anyway. In fact, as a baseball player, I've never been around in the summer. I mean, since I was a little kid. And, it's kind of nice playing with my kids and helping her with her schoolwork and things like that, and being with my spouse. And so there's that. And then that return to play, by the way, it's going to be a very different kind of return to play. Who would have ever thought in their life that we'd play in front of no fans? I mean, that's kind of a crazy idea. And then when we get there, there's going to be social distancing, and there's proposals where we can't shower after, and we can't eat together, and we can't, if you're not in the lineup, you have to sit in the stands. You can't be in the dugout. And just, it will be good to play, but it's not going to be a lot of fun. Initially, there might be that initial relief, but it won't look anything. Being quarantined with your team, asking permission to leave the hotel. I mean, it's very, very different. And so that sense of loss is really going to, is something that I think is important to acknowledge.
And is it different across the different groups that you work with? Because I know that you've been working with the Twins pretty regular, but you also work with NHL, NBA, and also with the football teams. So will you see differences across the different sports?
I think more so in the timing, Chuck. Football is able to almost pretend as if nothing has changed, other than the mini camps, the OTAs, things like that, have gone virtual for the most part, or meetings like that. But the NFL has not had to really change anything significant. I think coaches are expected to come back next week. Now, we can say all these things, but who knows what's actually going to happen. So I think we're a long ways yet from figuring out, what is it going to look like in the fall? Because we know as we get people more engaged, if they do become engaged, and here in Minnesota, people are allowed to go back to work in limited capacities and things like that. Well, all sorts of planning occurs. And then we're finding there's not a lot of people who are willing to do that. And you'd think as much as people want to get back to work and get out of the house and do all that, and they're grateful for it, they're going, I feel kind of safer in my house. I will just wait for a while.
I think people, I know as a fan, because I've over the years gone to a lot of Patriots games. I have a season ticket package, and then also with the Red Sox, I've got I couldn't go to all the Red Sox games, live too far from there, but we go to 10 game. They have a 10 game package or something.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to think about going back and sitting really close to people and being in those crowds when you're entering, and when you're standing in line to get a hot dog or a beer or a glass of wine or a water bottle. It's just really hard to think about being among all those people. And the risk just seems like, as much as I want to go, deeply want to go, I don't know when it's going to be safe to go again.
And as having been a member of the medical staff, I've been in Fenway many times, and I know what that visiting clubhouse is like. And you are right on top of people, and you're sitting in hallways, and you're just jammed in there shoulder to shoulder, and there's not a lot of room. And you have a small weight room, a very small training room, and just, where you eat, you're really on top of each other. And generally, that's okay. But
Right.
now you're thinking, okay, we're asking people to be fairly disciplined, and some people are good at that, and some people aren't. And some people are good at discipline in certain areas of their life and not other areas. And then when you throw an intense emotion in play, happiness or sadness, whatever it is, our decision making is impacted, and we know that. And so sports are full of emotions, and this thing is going to be really a challenge. And so thinking about some of the venues that aren't, where we aren't able to social distance very much, or being there without fans, I think it's just a tremendous challenge. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying it is going to be a very difficult thing, and it's going to create a whole nother set of emotions.
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that I've thought about is how much I've enjoyed the hiking, how much I enjoyed the time, to work on my garden. We were traveling a lot, and now we're not traveling at all. And while I love to travel, I actually am really enjoying being at home. I'm also in a privileged situation. I know a lot of people are struggling mightily right now, especially the people that got young kids and they're trying to school them, they're trying to work. Or they're not working and they don't have an income coming in, and they're worried about paying the rent and putting food on the table. So, there's a lot of other really challenging circumstances. But even for people that feel pretty comfortable in their circumstance, it still feels strange because it's a change that I think people like change when they initiate it, but not when it's done to them. So the fact that I don't know when I can go back to a ball game, or that I can't watch even a ball game on TV, or, those are little annoyances. And I remind myself how lucky I am in so many ways. And at the same time, those annoy me. And I know that they would annoy other people. And it's trying to reconcile. It's not, I know I shouldn't feel that way, but I do feel that way. And just telling yourself you shouldn't doesn't really change anything. You do.
It usually makes it worse. It's like standing in the batter's box saying, don't be nervous, don't be nervous. What it usually does is it makes you more nervous. And by the way, while you're thinking about and arguing with yourself, the ball's in the catcher's mitt. So it's generally not a good thing to do. And that's where we talk about accepting the emotions that you experience. You're anxious, okay. So we don't always have to have that perfect in the zone feeling in order to do our best. It doesn't mean that we still can't be effective.
Right. And my show isn't about just changing to a good mood. It's recognizing what emotions are telling you. It's an evolutionary system inside us that offers warning and guidelines and guideposts for us to kind of help, control our life. And I think it's legitimate to feel some of these anxious moments and this dissatisfaction with the current state of events, even though you got to live with it.
Yes, exactly. And a big part of, you asked me, one of the things that's common in my world is that a lot of times people have these ideas about, oh, I shouldn't feel this, I should feel that, and all these kinds of shoulds. And like I say, you feel as you feel what you feel. But the question that we sometimes ask ourselves, am I crazy here? Or am I okay? And that kind of questioning, am I crazy? Mostly when I'm talking to people, they're not crazy. These are normal human responses. And the emotions, as you say, it's just data and information. And it'll allow us to make better decisions in our life if we pay attention to them and if we're aware of what it is.
Well, I just got to ask you, because you raised this point. You said sometimes we're asking ourselves, am I crazy? And when you tell people, do you ever tell anybody, yes, you are? Just.
That's a crazy one. Well, it's usually, I'll put myself out there first. I go, no crazier than I am.
Yeah.
That kind of crazy is okay. There's good crazy and not so crazy, and not so good crazy.
Right. Oh, well, anyway, so you were talking about the NFL before, about they're sort of in a normal place because their season hasn't started.
Correct.
The NHL is trying to figure out, are they going to have playoffs, and where do they start from? The NBA, same sort of circumstance. I think they're kind of settling with, looks like they're going to go to Florida with the Disney complex, the wide world of sports down there. Right. And then baseball is really struggling with whether or not they're going to have a season, I guess.
Well, they really are, and certainly it's the health and safety, which is a huge issue. But we're also dealing with a a labor organization, and there's union issues, management and union issues, and around salaries, which has always been there. And certainly when significant events come up like this, you have to take that into consideration. And I think that that's certainly a significant issue.
What do you think about the fans' experience right now of missing sports? Have you had, I mean, again, this is not necessarily something you're dealing with professionally, but I'm sure you probably have thought about it. Also as a fan, I imagine, as well as just what you're hearing from other people. But I'm just curious about your thoughts about how it feels for those people that really love watching a baseball game or an NBA game or a football game. You know, it's gone on now for several months that there's no real live sport. I found, just an aside, I found myself watching old Celtics games because, you know, I get the Boston stations where I live and enjoying the heck out of them because I know they win the games that they're showing. So.
Yeah, you know the outcome. Well, you know, I think from my point of view, I mean, I am a big sports fan. I'm fortunate to be able to make my living in the sports world, but I'm also a big fan, and I have games on all the time. I see all kinds of games, and I'll sit and watch, and often I'll just like the sound of the game and having it on. And you know, particularly you can do this with baseball and kind of go in and out and things like that. So I definitely miss it. Have I found other things to do? Yes, I found other things to do. I hope the sports will come back. I'm sure they will. And yet I would like them to come back in a way where I can really enjoy it, not in a way that is like, oh, this is weird, just to have it, which is something different. I'm not really looking for something different. Now, it may be different. It's just not going to be normal, and at least for a while. So it'll just be different, and we'll have.
Well, there might be a new normal coming. I don't know. You know, it's hard to say. But you walk down the streets, you go into stores. I think people will be wearing masks for a while. I mean, we live in an area where we don't need masks for the streets where we walk on because there's plenty of room between people,
Sure.
And there's not that many people on the streets. But and also we walk in the woods, and there's not many people, and most people are pretty good about moving over these days as far as going hiking. But the idea of normal might be that it's a different normal than anything that we're used to. That's happened several times when we've had major circumstances that cause huge changes. I'll ask you about The Last Dance because that was really interesting. Did you happen to watch it?
I did not.
Oh, okay. So you didn't watch it.
Well, I know quite a bit about it, but I did not watch it.
So it was interesting in the sense that one is, here's possibly at least the most athletic basketball player that most anybody's ever seen, and someone that had an amazing affinity for peak performance. And then I didn't realize this at the time because I was a basketball fan, but not necessarily a Chicago Bulls fan. And, you know, having been, grown up in Massachusetts, if the Celtics weren't the champions, I wasn't that interested in the other champions, although I had some interest. But I didn't realize that Michael Jordan, every time he went to the finals, he won. And that's amazing to me, because how hard it is to get there, number one, and number two, always to be a winner in 6 different finals. So I actually enjoyed the show, but now there's more interest in doing more things like that. And Tom Brady, I guess, just signed a contract to do something similar. And again, having watched Brady all these years and been a season ticket holder with the Patriots for the last 10 years, I feel so privileged to have seen that level of football and to see the amazing number of wins and 6 Super Bowls, one coach, one quarterback over all those years. Absolutely astounding. And so I think it's kind of a rich form of entertainment, again, about something, if you happen to follow the sport and they're engaged and value and really enjoy seeing someone operate at that kind of peak performance level. Pretty amazing stuff, really.
It's remarkable. And you're talking about some performers that, they're almost freaks of nature. They're just different. You could always tell when you're in college who's different amongst the good players. Somebody has an extra gear. I remember seeing Herschel Walker run track at Georgia and at a track meet, and it's like, that guy moves different. So that's great to be able to have those kind of inside looks. And I also think that this type of programming is going to be more in demand, and more athletes, of course, are going to want to do it, particularly from a marketing and a branding standpoint, because things are going to change. The whole salary structure may change. The ways that people are able to earn money from sports are going to be really different. My guess is we're not going to have the large salaries that we've had as much that we've had in the past. In the future, I think there'll be change there. Certainly in the college sports, everybody's looking, and I think, people are interested in the human being, and that's what's fun about sports, is to be able to see somebody as a person. And I think it's interesting for the fans, and I think it's a good thing.
I don't know if I would have watched it if I was watching regular sports because it was on TV, but I think it caught a moment, right? It just kind of filled the gap for a lot of people, that people were missing sports, and so this was able to fill an emotional need, it seems like, for fans.
That's exactly right. And I think it's a way of connecting for fans that isn't available to them now by going in and cheering for their team. So we look for ways to connect and feel connected to others, or connected to the sports, or that emotion. I think that's true for all of us, not just in sports. We have to find, and are finding, if we're creative, other ways of connecting with people. I mean, to think about connecting with people, whether it's my doctor or my therapist, or whoever, through technology and a computer, where that may not have had a great appeal to me in the past, and now it's like, well, I'd rather be there in person, but it's not bad. I'll take it. I'd rather be sitting in a room with you now, but I'll take it. It's second best.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about too, Rick, was if you want to be a professional athlete and you have the possibility that your skills are going to be at that level, what does it take? For you emotionally, what does it take to actually make the grade?
It's easy to see when you're recruiting who's the biggest, fastest, and strongest. I mean, anybody can see that. When we talk about evaluating talent. But what I was interested in what happens to the kid when they lose the ball, when things don't work. Because I'm looking at, okay, what do? Do they blame their teammates? Do they blame the referee? Do they sit there and pout? Or did they get up and get back in the play as quickly as they can? And those are the kind of emotional competence skills that are really the real critical differentiators for long-term success. How do we deal with failure and adversity? Remember, it's great when it works, but what happens when it doesn't? And that's going to be a better predictor of success longer term. So how do they handle their emotions when things aren't working out, when they have to sit in the bench? And I know people that have gotten a lot of money to be a first-round pick, but haven't had that kind of emotional and maturity, and that good solid base internally, that it's derailed them from their careers, or it's kept them from really becoming more of who they could be, and it's cost them both personally and professionally. So things like that, I think, are really critical.
It's interesting, Rick, because I think of the really top players in high school. They don't have many failures, so they haven't got a lot of questions about when you get knocked down. I remember hearing one time when I was younger, somebody saying, it's not about getting knocked down. That's not surprising. Everybody gets knocked down. It's what you do when you get back up.
That's exactly right. So one of the things that I do work with different pro leagues around the draft. So for example, I'm sitting there. This was a few years back, where I'm working for an NHL team, and I'm at essentially what would be their combine, where they'd get the top 125 players in the world together. And we were up in Toronto watching these guys. And I'm sitting around a table and I'm looking, and they have 12 full-time scouts. And all these guys do is look at these 125 best players in the world, and it's a very international game, over and over and over. That's their full-time deal. So I'm thinking, okay, well, so what am I doing here? Why do they need me? But right. I'm looking for something really different. And I'm going to have the opportunity to interview these guys. And I'll have like maybe 20 minutes, I think we ended up with, per kid that we wanted to interview. And I was looking at the thing like, what do they do when they get up? Have they ever failed at anything? And I remember asking a kid who was one of the top 5 ranked kids in North America, and he was a great hockey player, a very bright kid. And, I asked him, I said, so, if you didn't play hockey, what do you want to do? And he goes, well, I'd like to go to law school. And I said, oh, okay, so you want to be a lawyer? He goes, no, I'd really like to go into business, but I think a law degree would be good. And I go, oh, that's great. I said, okay, so let's just say I'm your banker and you're in business. One of the questions I'm going to ask you, if you failed at anything. I said, you know why I would ask that? He goes, yeah, you're asking because if I failed, you're not going to give me the money. And I go, no, just the opposite. I want to see that you were able to fail and still be okay. And people who have more experience at success may not have the confidence necessary to know that they can fail and be okay. So in other words, if I'm always a straight A kid and I get to college and I get a B, I'm mortified because I think that my world has fallen apart.
Right.
I'm not used to it. I'm not sure that I'm okay. It impacts my self-esteem and self-concept. And so that's where, when I was talking earlier, we want to help people develop that internal self-concept that's not result dependent. It's really hard to do with successful people, but that's a big part of what I do in sports and in business.
Yeah, so a big key is trying to help people develop that resilience that comes with failure and being able to bounce back after, something that has happened that didn't go the way that you hoped, and yet still come back and be positive and maintain your self-esteem and self-confidence.
And identity. Being clear about who you are and how you want to be. Because typically, you ask people when you meet them, what do you do? And we tend to define ourselves by what we do, which is really different than who we are as a person. So I can be a professional golfer, and I work with plenty where I'm maybe one of the best in the world at what I do, but, am I an honest guy? Am I a pleasant person? Am I empathic? Do I have, I know some of these guys that, they're really good and they have the trophies and the money and all the money in the world, but they have no friends. They don't have much of a world. They don't have anybody that they can really rely on that is there for their best interests. And, it can be a very lonely place. And so when we identify, our identity is based around what we do, we run the risk that if there's a change in that, whether it's early retirement, career-ending injury, a change in economics where all of a sudden we get laid off or fired, boy, we encounter a major identity crisis. And that's often where I get called in. So we try and be proactive.
Any thoughts about what it takes, or the people that you've met over the years who are really good at this, what were part of their experiences growing up, or some of the lessons that they learned that helped to create this in everybody, really? Because, what we're talking about are life skills, not just professional athletic skills, of course, but, the idea of what kind of experiences in life help you to kind of live this kind of full capacity where you really utilize all the strengths that you have, and you don't, and you recognize that you do have weaknesses and flaws and you'll make mistakes, and yet that doesn't slow you, or it may slow you down, but it doesn't hold you back.
It doesn't bury you, yes. And, a lot of it has to do with our upbringing in our early years, and were we able to we talk about being able to manage our emotions, our impulses to act. Are we about instant gratification? Can we see the bigger picture? Can we create a sense of discipline? Or are we just kind of more entitled and we lack discipline in our world, and therefore we tend to feel a little less secure, so we're always looking for it or pressing for it. A lot of it is in our parenting and upbringing, and then also I think getting to know yourself separate from your sport, I think, is a big piece of the puzzle, so that when you move up into the professional ranks or the higher you go, that you don't have that dependency. So one of the things that I will often talk with athletes about and ask them, and it's kind of a funny question, but is I'll ask them if they're free to quit. And they'll look at you like, oh, what do you mean? Like, why would I quit? And
interesting question. Yeah.
Sometimes you're surprised by the answer. And if they really take it seriously, I'll often get, I don't feel like I'm free to quit. I have too many people dependent on me. I'm not sure what I would do if I didn't play ball, all these kinds of things. So if I'm not free to quit, now what I'm doing is no longer a choice. It's now about control and a need. And in order for me to be at my best, and this is where we're talking peak performance, being at our best is a matter of choice. I'm not talking about, whatever your skill level. I'm not talking about winning the championship. I'm talking about being at my potential. And I'll often ask people, depends how good you want to be. But I think if you don't feel like you're free to quit, you're not free to take the risks necessary to be at your best. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting, Rick. I was thinking as you were talking about this that one of the things that I did when I was first started to work with athletes in that Division I basketball team, one of the things that I wanted a way to connect with them because they didn't have a sports psychologist with the program. I was a strange person walking in the door. What were they going to say to me? Was this going to be something that was going to be invasive? I mean, there wasn't much trust, even though the coach said, "This is a good guy, go talk to him."
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I asked them, and I found it really useful to go back to on occasion is, can you remember when you first started to play basketball and the fun that you had?
Yes.
When did it become fun for you? And it was a wonderful, rich story for them because now, they're having fun talking about it. The memories are kind of fun, whether it was shooting baskets with their dad when they were a kid or just a bunch of teammates or friends that just got together that they hung with, that they really loved being with.
Yeah.
But it wasn't about performing at a high level. It was about enjoying the game and enjoying yourself being part of the game. And that's sometimes I found that was useful to bring them back to that when they were struggling with the skills and trying to perform at such a high level.
No question. I had a guy who's a professional golfer on the tour, and he was very good. But he was running into some slumps here, and he had a very bad temper. And what was happening is the worst. It just kept snowballing. And one day he walked off the course in the middle of a round, went to his rental car, broke every club in the bag, and drove off. And eventually he finds his way to me. And listening to him, and we're talking, and I finally asked him, I said, I got a kind of a basic question here, but might sound stupid, but why do you play golf? And he looks at me and he goes, well, because I love it. And I go, it doesn't sound like you love it. It sounds pretty miserable. So I'm wondering why you do that. And he goes, that's a really good question. I said, so why do you play? And he couldn't answer me. And we sat there for about 15 minutes, silence. I said, so why don't you do this? Why don't you go figure out why you play golf? And when you figure it out, give me a call. Let me know. So 6 months go by. I don't hear from the guy. I get a call. I go down to Houston, meet him in the airport. He goes, I finally figured out why I play. I said, great. Why do you play? He goes, here was the thing. I finally figured out, he says, initially I was so pissed off at you because you didn't help me. And I was pissed off at everybody. And eventually I didn't touch a club for a couple months. Eventually I started to play around a little bit. And I finally figured out the reason I play is because I like to hang out with the guys. And so now I'm starting to hang out with the guys. I said, sounds like a good strategy. And so all of a sudden he felt free to just be himself. So it was less of a need to be a certain way and more of I want to, which is a choice. So he went on to get right back to where he was, and it was really pretty impressive with the guy. But I think what happens, to your point, we get distant from what got us there in the first place. We become either labeled or successful and caught up in all those external kinds of variables where we become dependent on it, that we become distant from our passion. And if we can start connecting, helping them and coaching them through that, I think is really critical. So I think you did a really good thing there.
Thanks. Hey, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is coaches before we end this, Rick.
Yeah.
And I know you wrote that book about all the other stuff with coaches, and that's what they're all dealing with now. Any thoughts about what's happening on the coaching scene and what makes for a good coach during times of crisis, maybe?
Being good at relationships. We say coaching is about relationships. And if we think about what we were just talking about, what got me into this business in the first place, and I ask coaches, why do you coach? Well, I got into coaching because I love the game, and I wasn't good enough to play professionally or whatever it was, or I did play professionally, and now I want to continue to teach and give back. And so staying connected to your purpose, I think, is really helpful, which you can do whether you play or not. So right now we're not able to compete. But if you have a passion around teaching and being available as a trusted advisor for people and helping them grow and develop as people, all that continues. We have to be a little bit creative about it, but in a way, this is an opportunity to bring us back to some of those basics that we generally don't have time for because we get so caught up in the execution of the X's and the O's and the competition and the traveling and the speaking engagements and the conferences and all those, and roster managements and all those things. And by the way, this whole thing at the college level is going to look really, really different coming back. And so there's going to be a lot of disorientation. And some people will want to be able to be part of that. And some people might say, you know what, this isn't for me anymore, and it's changed. And that's all okay. But I think being there for your athletes, understanding that not only are they going through experiences, but having outlets for yourself, making sure you're connected as a coach so that you can manage your own psychological well-being versus just kind of doing what many of us talk about doing, denying those emotions. It's like a parent who's supposed to have all the answer, or the CEO that's supposed to have all the answers, the coach. No, I mean, you're people too. So yes, coaches and leaders can be in a very lonely position. And by the way, athletic directors and college presidents, I mean, these are part of the people that I work with as well. These are real people who are really feeling isolated and alone and under a ton of pressure right now.
It's interesting. You make me think there's a fellow that I would listen to who was a really outstanding salesperson. And he talked about that if you have a lot of customers, you should have a list of every customer that you have. And every few days, you should be calling some of these people, not to sell them something, but to see how they're doing.
That's right.
And then when seeing how they're doing, sometimes you'll end up selling them something, but that's not why you call. It's about seeing how they're doing, because you want them to know you care about them. You miss seeing them. You haven't done something for them in a while. We know this is an unusual circumstance. Many of these people are at home. And he said, I can't tell you how many people are so thankful to get a phone call.
Yes, exactly right. So one of the things when we work with in the financial services area, when things happen to us like the economy going bad, so like around 9/11, when something scary happens and the markets crash, or a global pandemic, or in the mid 2000s or 07, 08 in there, when the market crashed, there's people are fearful. They don't know, and our clients are fearful. Well, not only are our clients fearful, but so are our advisors. And so I have to be able, in order to be an effective leader, and this is the same to your point as a coach, but it's for all leaders, I have to be aware of my own emotions. I have to pay attention to what's going on in my inner world. And not only my own emotions, I have to pay attention to the experience of others. And at the same time, I also have to pay attention to what's going on in the industry and in the markets and the bigger picture. So I have three different things I have to be focused on. And if I can do that effectively, if I'm not paying attention or aware of my emotions, what I'm going to likely do is stay away from my clients because I don't know what to say. I don't have an answer. Nobody knows when the pandemic's going to be over. Nobody knows what's going to happen to the market. But since I think I'm supposed to be the fixer and the person with the solutions, and if I don't have that, then there's no place for me. So that's exactly what we don't want people to do now. We want people to reach out, just as you're saying, and at the very least say, be honest with people. What's going to happen with the markets? I don't know what's going to happen with the markets, but what I can do is I can assure you, and we will work through this together so that you're not alone. Giving people a sense of security, whether you're a student athlete, whatever it is, or a parent with a child who's fearful. We'll figure it out together and we'll be okay. So those are the things that security is what you want to provide to the people you work with. And that's one of my big messages to coaches and people and all leaders really right now.
Are you seeing much in the way of depression at this point? Because I'm wondering, it seems to me it's hard to stay away from that if what you love and what you're passionate about, you're being held back from doing.
Yeah, and some of it is tied to personalities. Sometimes introverts are doing fairly well right now because
Yeah, I've seen that too. That's
pretty
interesting.
good at social isolation. They're pretty self-sufficient. But people who tend to be more social, people who are part of team sports, are used to being connected. Yeah, I'm certainly seeing that. We're seeing a rise in suicides. Certainly calls to mental health hotlines. I'm certainly busier than than ever, and that's okay. We want to make resources available to people, but yeah, all of those things are in play right now, Chuck. It's a scary time.
Right. Any thoughts you have about things that might be helpful to people to keep their spirits up, even though, again, recognizing it's legitimate to feel some of the sadness and this even depression where, the circumstances are not what you want and you can't change them. And I know for myself, the message is control what you can, but what you can't control, you just got to let go of. And I think you said it yourself, while you love sports, you found some other things to do. I'm of the opinion that you can create lists of things that you love doing.
Yes.
Plan for those things so that you make sure that you are doing things that uplift yourself and that it's actually the whole concept to me of emotional intelligence got exciting when I learned you could plan emotionally what you want to feel. Most of the time we just think we got to deal with whatever's happening and we do a lot of times, but I think there are times that we can actually, that's the concept of my radio show, take the wheel and control how you feel. Do that. Any thoughts you have along those lines, Rick?
Yeah, well, I think certainly accepting those things, not fighting with yourself is important. We're dealing with, you hear unprecedented, uncertain, all these things, but everything is ambiguous right now. And there's quite a big body of research around ambiguity and how people deal with ambiguous times. So if we think of ambiguity as the unknown, it's also stressful. It's really stressful. And what many of us try and do, whether we're in the sports business, we try and predict and prepare for a game so that we can control the unknown. We don't want to be unprepared. We try and plan for our savings and our investments and for retirement. We're trying to manage ambiguity, which is really stress. So therefore, we're constantly feeling stress. And what we want to make sure that we don't do is we want to make sure that we don't get stuck. And when I say stuck, I'm talking about emotionally stuck. Because often people are stuck until they have some clarity. Until something's no longer ambiguous. Well, that could change. And I've seen this with our players. Well, initially, if you remember, we're going to stop spring training. We'll put the season off 2 weeks. And you go, okay, well, this sucks, but we can deal with that 2 weeks. It'll be kind of good. And then it becomes a month, and then it's another 2 weeks, and then it's another month. And so the line keeps moving. And so knowing for sure, eventually what's ambiguous will become clear. Either we will play or we won't play. But even if we will play, it's like, well, what happens if somebody gets sick? Are we going to have to shut the season down? So there's always ambiguity in our life. And learning how to manage that ambiguity is really critical now so that we don't get in that depression. So we have to look at things like yes, to your point, what can we control? But also maybe use it as a time to figure out, well, what is our purpose here? And it's almost like it's not about the other person, it's about you. And while things might be happening around you that you can't control, you can control your experience and what it is you choose to do. So we have control, we have certain things that we don't have control over, but there are certain things we do have control over. And so we want to be able to utilize those things, but also start living the things that are important to us so that we are starting to have more fulfilling and rewarding lives. And when we're happier, we're going to do better, and we're going to be able to feel less stress and therefore think more creatively as we're allowed to return to our lives. So we want to be flexible and be able to be creative, but we have to prepare ourselves so that we can be in a place physiologically where we can think clearly and think creatively. And when we're stressed, our worlds become very, very small. So make sure that we're looking beyond our own experience and taking in the experience of others, and have empathy and reach out to others so that we're able to manage that in a more effective manner.
Sounds like a pretty good place to close.
I hope it's helpful.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thanks so much, Rick, for being on the show and spending some time with me today. And pleasure talking to you. It's good to catch up with you. It's fun to talk to you about this.
Always good, and look forward to when we can do it in person, man.
Okay, and you too.
Yeah.
Take care, Rick.
Yeah,
okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.